Hello everyone watching today's video. On the backdrop of the white-capped waves, amidst the fierce howling wind and the strong smell of sea salt, the story is not only about the journey to find food, but also a testament to the courage, resilience and desire to conquer nature of humans. Each giant tuna pulled up from the deep is the result of sweat, of collective strength, and of the unshakable belief that they can conquer the sea. And now, imagine yourself standing on the deck of a giant fishing boat, the smell of engine oil and the salty taste of the sea permeating every breath. To relive that legendary moment, the rumbling sound of the engine starting up, the rhythmic sound of waves lapping against the side of the boat mixed with the calls of each other. Kilometers of long fishing line bundles, shiny hooks carefully prepared, bait boxes full of small fish and fresh squid are ready. On their sunburned faces, there is an indescribable determination. Everyone knows that this trip is not just about fishing, but also about the livelihood of the whole family, the bond between them and the sea from father to son. As the heavy ship leaves the dock, the view of the harbor gradually recedes behind, replaced by the vast ocean opening up before their eyes. The waves rock the ship, white foam flying up every time the bow of the ship tears through the water. The salty wind blows fiercely onto the deck, soaking every strand of hair and shirt. But no one complains, because everyone has long been accustomed to this rhythm of life. The laughter is bustling, mixed with stories passed down from generation to generation about trips full of giant tuna, about days facing fierce storms, and even the bright moonlit nights in the middle of the ocean that they have passed through. A day of hunting giant tuna begins with patience. Fishermen drop long fishing lines into the deep sea, sharp hooks baited with catfish. Mackerel or squid, the favorite dishes of ocean tuna. They knew that, hundreds of meters below, bluefin tuna, each weighing hundreds of kilograms, were cutting through the water like living steel arrows. They were strong, agile, and not easily subdued. A bite from a tuna could turn everything peaceful into a relentless battle. Where the fishing line was so taut it almost broke, where the fisherman's arms trembled under the terrible pulling force, and where human will was tested to the limit. On deck, the atmosphere was always tense like a dramatic stage. Everyone waited, watching the gentle vibrations on the long fishing line that was lowered. At times, it seemed like everything was silent, with only the howling wind and the sound of the waves remaining. But then suddenly, the line jerked as if the entire ocean below had just woken up. "It's bitten," someone shouted. Immediately pulling the whole group into position. The calloused hands gripped the rod tightly. The bare feet clung to the wet deck. The bulging muscles exerted all their strength to hold the deep-sea monster. The giant tuna under the water thrashed wildly, causing the sea surface to foam white. The rope was so tight that it seemed like it was about to explode. Each meter of rope was pulled up and then jerked down. The tug of war was like a never-ending war. Sweat poured out, mixed with the salty seawater, streaming down the dark faces. Occasionally, they had to shout to each other to change who was holding the rope. Because the strength of the tuna was terrifying, it could pull an adult down if they were not steady. But at that moment, the enthusiasm and team spirit of the fishermen shone brighter than ever. Everyone understood that to bring that giant tuna to the deck, it could not rely on just one individual, but the strength of a whole group working together. The moment the giant fish was pulled close to the surface of the water. The silver light on its body flashed under the sunlight like a giant sword. Everyone's heart was pounding, because if there was just a little mistake, the fish would struggle and escape, taking all the effort with it. A decisive pull, a loud shout, and the fish weighing nearly 300 kilograms was finally brought to the deck. It thrashed violently, its tail swinging like a sledgehammer hitting the wooden floor, forcing everyone to dodge. But then, with tight holds, with strong ropes, the fishermen successfully controlled the ocean monster. Cheers echoed throughout the ship, dispelling all fatigue. Such giant bluefin tuna were not only trophies, but also invaluable assets. Fresh, bright red tuna meat is extremely valuable on the market, especially in Japan, where a fish can be auctioned for tens of thousands, even millions of dollars. But for these fishermen, the most precious thing is not just money, but the pride of overcoming the challenges of nature, the continuation of the tradition of their ancestors who have been attached to the sea for thousands of years. When the sun began to rise, the golden light shone down on the sparkling sea. The deck was already full of heavy spoils. But the journey was not over. They knew clearly that there were still countless other tuna swimming around, and each one could be killed. The battle turned into a new dramatic battle. The ropes were lowered again. Eyes followed every slightest vibration, and the ship continued to rush forward, carrying endless hope and desire. After the first giant tuna was brought aboard, the ship was still filled with excitement, but no one could afford to rest for too long. The sea was never predictable, and every moment of delay could mean an opportunity was lost. Experienced fishermen knew that schools of tuna often moved in groups, sometimes dozens, hundreds of them appearing at the same time, hidden under the dark blue waves. Therefore, when a fish bit the hook, the opportunity to continue was very high. Everyone quickly returned to their positions, continued to drop bait, pull the line, preparing for the next battle. The sun had risen high. The dazzling light spread across the sea. Each seagull flew low over the water, making hoarse cries as if signaling the presence of schools of fish deep below. Flying fish occasionally jumped out of the water, gliding far away with their thin wings, making the scene even more vivid. The fishermen watched for any signs, knowing that nature has a way of telling those who are sensitive enough to listen. A patch of water suddenly bubbled violently, silver flashing as small fish scurried away in panic. That was the sign that the tuna were chasing. Immediately, the captain shouted loudly, the ship's engine roared, and the boat changed direction. The fishermen focused all their attention, dropping hundreds of hooks, creating an endless net deep under the ocean. Each fresh bait was filled with the scent of the sea, awakening the hunting instinct of the giant bluefin tuna. And then, just a few minutes later, a sudden jerk pulled the line taut like an arrow. A man nearby shouted, "Got it!" His voice was lost in the wind. The group immediately rushed in, their strong hands gripping the fishing rods tight. Their shoulders tensed. The fish in the water struggled violently, darting like an arrow, causing the line to whistle. The sound of friction was deafening, as if the rope could break at any moment. The other fishermen immediately supported, holding on tightly together, pulling each other in short sections, sweat dripping down their backs. The ship shook violently. The sides of the ship were filled with foam, but no one backed down. This battle lasted for dozens of minutes, then hours. The tuna refused to surrender. It continuously dove deep into the bottom, then jumped up to the surface, creating powerful tail movements that caused the water to splash up into white columns. The fishermen strained, their hands bleeding from the friction with the rope, but their eyes were still shining brightly, as if there was an invisible source of power that gave them more strength. Finally, when the fish gradually became exhausted, its giant body appeared clearly under the clear blue sea, its silver light sparkling like a living block of steel. Once again, the whole team shouted in unison. The final decisive pulls brought the fish weighing more than 400 kilograms onto the deck. The cheers resounded again, drowning out the sound of the wind and waves. The giant tunas were captured one by one. Each time they were pulled up, everyone's hearts burst with joy. The deck was gradually filled with huge fish bodies. Bright red blood spread out, mixing with the seawater to form a deep color. However, the fishermen were not shaken, because to them, that was the color of victory, of sweat and determination. But it was not always so favorable. There were tunas that were so aggressive, just a flick of the tail would cause the sturdy steel wire to break, leaving behind a heart-wrenching regret. There were times when the whole group exerted all their strength for hours, only to witness the giant fish disappear right before their eyes. That feeling of disappointment weighed heavily on their chests. But everyone had to stand up quickly, put aside their failures and continue, because the ocean did not allow him to give up. In the midst of those tense moments, there are still moments that make people feel the magical beauty of the ocean. When night falls, the sea surface is dyed a mysterious black. The sky is full of stars stretching endlessly. Fishing lights hanging on the deck shine brightly like a floating city in the middle of the ocean. The lights attract schools of squid and small fish, creating a magical feast of light and darkness. Fishermen sit together, quickly eat hot rice, drink strong tea, and tell stories of old trips. Stories that are both tragic and heroic. In the laughter echoing in the sea breeze, people clearly feel the strong connection between people who share the same profession. The same belief in the ocean. The following days passed. The ship moved continuously, chasing giant schools of tuna along the cold ocean currents. Every day, dozens of tuna weighing hundreds of kilograms were subdued one by one, filling the cold compartment below. The preliminary processing takes place right on the deck. The fish are gutted, cleaned, and immediately frozen to preserve their freshness. The sharp sound of knives, the sound of water pouring down, the fishy smell mixed with the smell of engine oil, all combined to create a unique soundtrack that can only be found on offshore fishing boats. Whenever they have a short free time, fishermen lie on the deck, looking up at the vast sky, letting the wind and waves lull them to sleep. But soon, the shout of, "They're biting the hook again," rings out again, pulling them up immediately. That cycle continued, day after day, like an endless melody. That only those who have spent their lives with the sea can understand its true melody. And then, there were times when nature was no longer gentle. The clear blue sky suddenly turned gray. Dark clouds rolled in, the wind howled fiercely, the waves rose high like giant walls of water. A storm suddenly struck. The ship swayed violently in the middle of the ocean. Everyone shouted to each other to pull in the ropes, trying to reinforce the fishing gear to avoid damage. Seawater rushed onto the deck, freezing cold, sweeping away anything that was not tied down tightly. In the middle of the storm, the wind roared, the waves crashed against the side of the ship as if wanting to tear everything apart. But the fishermen's eyes remained steadfast. They knew that they had to hold on, had to survive to return, because behind them were their families. The fishing village waiting a new day begins with the loud banging of pots from the ship's kitchen, signaling a simple but energetic breakfast. Hot white rice, a few pieces of braised fish, and some pickled vegetables. Everyone eats hastily, not because they don't appreciate the meal, but because out there, a giant school of tuna is waiting. Every second that passes can be the difference between a big catch and a failed trip. When dawn breaks, the gentle light gilds each wave, and the flock of seabirds appears again, calling out loudly for fishermen. On board where there is a lot of tuna. The captain squints into the distance, then nods to signal. The engine roars again, and the ship heads toward the swirling flock of birds. Just a few minutes later, the sea surface suddenly rolled. Silver spots flashed as the school of tuna cut through the water and rushed forward. Giant bodies jumped out of the water, sparkling under the sunlight like silver arrows. The entire deck seemed to explode. Drop the line. A loud shout rang out. Each fishing line hundreds of meters long. Thousands of hooks were dropped at the same time, sinking deep into the ocean. The fresh, sweet baits immediately released their scent, spreading in the cold current. The moment of waiting was less than 10 minutes. The first line vibrated violently. The strong jerk made the entire reel of the camera screech. The fisherman held on tight. His